friends, welcome back to the Film Alchemist podcast, the show where we look at movies we love, break them apart, to find out what gives them their magic. I'm your host, Josh Griffey, joined as always by my wisecracking with some kind of mental disorder child hunting co-host,
Alex Dandino.
That's right, the final case that the pod has taken this month. Today we're talking The Golden Child with Eddie Murphy. As always, if you like the show, please take a second and leave us a rating and review, especially on Apple Podcast app. That helps shows out like us out enormously, and we appreciate it. Rate and review everywhere. Share the show with your friends on all your social medias. If you haven't found us yet, we're on every social media you're on, guys. Get at us, talk movies with us, let us know what you'd like to cover. We have a lot of time now. We're planning on covering a lot of movies, so if you got something, now's the time. Get it in, man. We want to hear from you. Yeah, and also, you can find us, if you want to hear our voices and see our faces, you can follow us on YouTube. Our channel is called Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end. All right, yes. Alex. So we do have one announcement here briefly at the top of the show. As this month is ending and we're wrapping up the Pod Takes the Case month, we have our next theme decided. The pod is held hostage. Right? Yeah, or captive. Maybe captive is the word. Because it's not necessarily always hostage scenarios. People aren't asking for things.
I think captive's a good way.
Yeah.
Held captive.
The pod is held captive, right? So this is us tied up against our will movies in remote locations. So we're going to be doing that. But starting next month, right, next week, we're going to be dropping minimum of 2 episodes a week, right? Every Tuesday and every Thursday, we'll have a new movie per our normal monthly themes. We're going to do a double theme next month. So not only are we doing The Pod is Held Captive, right, with movies like, let's say, Black Snake Moan, Misery, this, that, and the other, we will also be doing The Pod is a Madman, right, which is going to be kind of serial killers, right? I really wanted to discuss Peeping Tom and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. So these are movies that put us in the POV of a despicable being, right? A madman, a killer, whatever. So we're doing a double theme. I have some double features I'm lining up. We're going to have a lot of content coming for you guys. We hope that's okay with you. We have a lot of time on our hands, and we're watching a lot of movies to try to stay happy and, chipper during this moment in time. So, hopefully you guys will want to do that with us. But without further ado, The Golden
Man
Child.
bun and flippy hair.
Sorry. Is that what we're renaming it? Man bun and flippy hair? How dare you, sir? How dare you, Macklemore? All right. Now, on to the show. The Golden Child. I think we can all agree up front. Easily the greatest Eddie Murphy vehicle. Probably the best detective movie of all time. Alex, had you seen The Golden Child previous to this viewing?
Yeah, I had actually.
Walk me through your thoughts rewatching this epic classic.
I had seen it a long time ago on TV when I was a kid. It's one of those movies where you watch it and like the 80s, especially late 80s are great. Like Eddie Murphy was like Eddie Murphy. Like that was every single one of his movies made money. He actually said that in an interview about The Golden Child because by the way, in like 1999, he was talking about this and he said how much he fucking hated this movie. He was like this, like The Golden Child, which is a total piece of shit, made money. It's made a lot of money.
Yeah,
but I kind of disagree with him. Like I remember making fun of this on the show. Here's the thing. I actually was thinking a completely different movie.
You were thinking of a different Eddie Murphy chasing down an Eastern child?
It was a different, I was thinking of a different movie that he had referenced, but rewatching this, I don't understand why I understand basically this movie changed a lot from script to screen, as things do, but this movie is still really good. Like, it's fun, man. What's the I don't understand what anybody else's problem. Like, Charles Dance hated it too, apparently. But again, like, this movie's fun. It's a great detective movie. Like, it's a great detective movie.
Yeah. Well, this is the funny thing. When we first conceived this show now, almost 2 years ago now, I think, 2 years ago.
I guess.
This was one of the 10 movies I had on the list of this is why I want to start the podcast. Right? Because our other show, the Long Box Sessions, we're like, that's mostly comic-related things. And we discuss a lot of movie and TV, but as it pertains to comics, and I was like, man, I really just want to talk about The Golden Child. And so it took us a long time, but we finally got there from that original list of movies. I saw Golden Child young, man. I was a kid, and I got hit with like a nasty, nasty case of chicken pox. I was really fucking sick and laid up, and my mom worked. So she had, to still use the babysitter.
Right.
And our babysitter was just a lady who had like a normal house that like people would throw their kids in, right?
Yeah.
Like nowadays, I have a kid, and everything's like a highly regulated, like, thumbprint entry.
That's a really specific Midwest thing, because like I went to those houses too.
Yeah,
like, when
and
my
I don't
mom
know.
worked,
Maybe they don't do that anymore. Maybe there is still, but yeah, they would just drop us off at a local lady's house. She's just like, I'm the babysitter
Absolutely.
now. I stay home, and you pay me some money, and I'll watch your kids all day. And so that's what we did, right?
There were Alex Ward's mom.
Yeah, there were like 20 of us though in this normal house. Like way too many kids probably for one lady to watch. Yeah, but I got really sick, and if you got sick, you were sent into quarantine, which was essentially, I slept in this lady's bed. So the bed that her and her husband shared, right? And I remember it was kind of like this classic Midwestern, like old person's room from that era, right? This would have been in the 80s, I believe. But yeah, this kind of like floral thing, but like there's a chair, but it was covered in plastic. And you guys can imagine the room. Disgusting wallpaper that was peeling.
Probably a lot of wood,
little
bit of wood accents. Something
Could
like
you
that.
imagine that dude coming home and he's like, you let that little chicken pox fucker sleep in my bed? Like, especially what we're dealing with now, you're like, the disgustingness of this house must have been even more than my brain can remember. So we're sitting there, and I had to be in this room. I think I was in it for 3 days, 4 days, something like that. And she's like, I was like, what can I do? She's like, watch TV. I was like, okay. She didn't have TV, though. She had a VHS, and there were two movies. Okay. And it was The Golden Child and Karate Kid.
Wow.
And so I watched Karate Kid once and went, meh. And I watched The Golden Child on repeat for 3 to 4 days in a row. For like 8 hours a day, I would just sit and rewatch Golden Child over and over again. And I think it's funny, if you track my life backwards, I think you can see the roots of all the stuff I like in movies exist in this, embryo form in Golden Child, right?
I mean, I would say, furthermore, your general conceit of movies lies in the decision of Karate Kid, meh.
Yeah, right. A beloved classic of the 80s. I'm like, I guess that's all right. I just wanted Johnny to get his face rearranged. That's just me. But yeah, I looked back and I was like, you could argue, right? Because I know everyone has their movies, right?
Right.
And so, like, for me, I remember when I was a really little kid, the first movie I was ever madly in love with was Abbott and Costello's Jack and the Beanstalk. Loved it. Watched it all the fucking time, right? And I remember going to the theater, right? Way too young, probably. But my dad took me to see Jurassic Park. And that's when you're like, holy fuck. That changed my entire world. And I was like, I don't know what it is. I want to make movies. I don't know how to do any of that, but I want to do what's on that screen, right? Then you get Mallrats as a VHS as a teen. You're like, I want to make that movie. And so, like, everyone has their, like, movies, right? Your movie journey. Right. And I think if you look back, among all the movies, I think this is the one I forget. This so defined the taste that I would have for the rest of my life is The Golden Child. And what I love about this movie, because I know everyone has been kind of taking shots at me, because I said, I think this is the best Eddie Murphy detective movie. And I'll tell you why. I think this movie, and again, I understand it's a bit clunkier than people probably want it to be, right? There are some definite things that don't, it's not a completely flowing machine at all times. There are some chunky beats, right? Fine.
Sure.
I love seeing Eddie Murphy. This is the most human of the Eddie Murphy detectives, right? Because every other character, I'm Eddie Murphy just playing a guy who's, whether it's Axel Foley or I forget the character name in 48 Hours, right? Right. That guy's a criminal who gets out and, like, they're starting. But this is a guy who has real ties to some very serious, heavy things coming on, right? Yeah. He's trying to save kids. We never quite know if he's a detective or just a PI. I think he's just a PI, right?
Well, I think that's, that's the most relevant thing is about Eddie Murphy's character in general, is that he is, like, specifically a person who seeks missing children. Like,
right.
That's
and they
not
give us
any
context
of the other
clues that
he
seemingly has lost a couple before. We see the case actually of Cheryl kind of gets washed aside in this movie.
Yeah.
It's a truly disturbing gut punch in this movie, right? And so I think if you give him that context, right, of here's Eddie Murphy, right, this great comedic force that we all know, And then you put the Eddie Murphy persona onto a guy who is struggling so mightily against this world where these innocent children get destroyed. His comedic persona takes on an extra interesting dramatic layer to me. And I know people think I'm full of shit, but I really honestly believe it. I find him fascinating in this movie. And then later there's a scene where I was like, whoa, this is getting into psychosis level that's very fascinating.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, and this is like the bigger... I agree with that assumption, by the way. But because humor, like, we do it all the time. Humor is a deflection. Like, we constantly... you and I constantly crack jokes. Just before the show, we were literally talking about what's going on in the world, literally trying to just make each other laugh for the sake of not sobbing in the middle of this show itself. Like, that I think is the most human. See, I just wiped my face too. That's like the most human element of Eddie Murphy's character, is that humor is not like what defines the character itself, but like really it's the diffusion of, holy shit, this is... I have to take what I do so seriously, like I have to find something entertaining in it.
Right, well, imagine this too, right? So we see the absurdity of him like trying to walk around and put up the flyers. You get this great scene at the start where Eddie Murphy is just kink-shaming this guy at a newsstand. He's like, cake on butts. It's cake on butts. Are you kidding me? I was like, hey, man, first off, let's not kink-shame. I'm not a fan of that. There are so many things that we can do with the human body. You got to let people out, right? But you see him trying and trying and trying, right? Going through L.A., setting up the montage of, like, art and people, whatever.
Right.
When he goes on that TV show, it's a classically great Eddie Murphy moment, right? This kind of character who's so much smart. He almost sees behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, we'll get to later. And he's sitting here with these fucking rubes who want to talk about whatever. The guy keeps cutting him off about how important it is without letting him say the message.
Right.
And this scene, to me, is so great because it's Eddie Murphy doing his amazing and this is not Eddie Murphy having to do the you know, and like all the jokes.
No.
The way he looks at Mel, I think his name's Mel, right? It's so fucking hilarious. And he's just eviscerating him, right, with his eyes, and it's comedy gold. But at the end of it, he's like, hey, fucking stop. There's a girl missing, right? And so we track this guy, Eddie Murphy, right, his character, walking through the streets of L.A., finding out that this girl got caught up with bikers, they tattooed her, and they fucking sold her for a carton of smokes and some pork fried rice. They sold this girl into what would become her death, right? This movie takes a very hard and dark turn right away, because we think this is it starts off, right, with this kind of cool, here's a child, you know, he only brings back one of the three birds. Why, I don't know. He should probably have brought them all back. It doesn't matter, right? Bad guys come in, right? It's Tywin Lannister. Classic bad guy setup, right? They've got the different stereotypes. You're like, all right, some kung fu fighting, right? We got martial arts fighting with monks. You're like, this movie's great. They use the claw game to capture him. You're like, yes, I'm 100% in for what this movie is, right? This kind of fantasy journey through Eastern mysticism through the lens of modern-day 80s Los Angeles, right?
Right.
It's a classic tale, right? The past versus the present, their old traditions. We don't believe. We know everything, right? We're on the cutting edge. No, there's a deep well of horror out there. Fine. That's the movie you think you're getting. The story with Cheryl, to me, is such the important linchpin of the movie that, again, we just kind of wash it away. Because, and this is the fucked up thing, the story's even doing it, where they're just like, oh, Cheryl was simply to be ingredients in oatmeal, right? Like they downplay her so much that, again, it's reinforcing this terrifying world that Eddie Murphy's character faces throughout the movie.
Right.
They matter a lot to him and seemingly zero to anyone else.
Well, yeah, Cheryl, everybody, it's such a fascinating, it's such an interesting thing to watch. Like Eddie Murphy turns on a dime so often in this movie too. Like it becomes very serious. Like that scene, like at the end of that fight scene where he does confront that guy about like what they did with the girl. Yeah. Like that is like, that's some heavy shit. And also like
he actually just looks at him and has to say, "You sold her?"
Yeah. Right after like a really weird fight scene where like it was fun, but it's also like intercut with like a heavy metal music video for some reason that everyone is like totally focused on watching. Like I cannot conceive of why this is so important, but everyone else is just like watching a music video. But ultimately, like Eddie Murphy is so Eddie Murphy is so Eddie Murphy's so good because he turns on a dime so quickly and goes back and forth between humor and drama. This is why he's a great actor, and this is why he's so good, particularly in the 80s when he became so famous, because he can do that turn. It's something we look for now in a lot of comedic actors, like Adam Sandler does it a lot, where these guys can play both sides of the coin. But this one is particularly interesting because he has to do three different things, which is be a serious detective, be a comedian, and then on top of that, be an action star. So he's got a lot going on. It's really cool.
Yeah, and that scene in the House of the Yellow Dragons is extra unusual, too. Because not only do they just, like, I get it, you're bikers, but, like, you would rather sit on a motorcycle than a couch. Like, there's a lot of weird things happening in this house, right?
Right.
The weirdest of being is, like, as we're tying her up and we're about to learn that this innocent teenage girl was sold simply because they needed blood.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my God.
It's extra vile because you're like, they could have just caught any old person, whatever. It had to be her, right?
Right.
And it's just extra, tragedy that we must suffer as an audience. But then they just intercut it with his sidekick lady, right? Cynthia Lewis, is that the actress's name? Anywho,
I think so, yeah.
She comes in and starts whooping ass, right? It's so strange because they're like, in the middle of the ass whooping, we need just an extra long hold take of her doing a monkey bar cling with a wet t-shirt contest. And then there's just 3 or 4 gratuitous, like, wet t-shirt moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's what... I think that's the weird element of this movie is that there is this really cool, true detective style, dark tragedy happening, right?
Yeah.
Where you have kind of the world of ancient mysticism meets, how easily they can prey on the, underbelly of the modern day world, right? That as everything's moving forward in a big city, we become more expendable, right? That we are valued less as humans, right? I think that's a really cool story. And then they're just like, oh, we need wet t-shirt moments. Or really strange moments of, like, Eddie Murphy holding the family up for a chip, right? But that moment I actually think is really interesting, right? That's just a funny moment, like, playing on everyone thinks Eddie Murphy's a bad guy.
Well, I mean,
but the wet t-shirt moment, that's where this movie gets a little clunky. Is you're like, you don't need some of that kind of stuff. But Eddie Murphy's performance in that scene is just, he's amazing. Just beating that guy's ass and trying to get the info. I mean, I think a lot of that's that first Eddie Murphy I saw. And I don't remember the others as well because I haven't seen them as often. But I like that dichotomy of this movie so much.
I think what's great, I think what happens in this movie, and like as we go further into it, like the thing that's so wonderful is that what you get to see is a movie that probably originally was really taken very like this movie comes out as like sort of like a partial, like sort of a comedy, a little bit of drama, a lot of action. It's basically an action adventure comedy. What I think you can see though is at the start, like I read a lot about like how this movie was made, and this thing got like savaged after preview screenings. Like the Paramount took it back and like redid the whole thing, and this was like after he had already been in Beverly Hills Cop, I think. Mm-hmm. I think this was a year after Beverly Hills Cop. Like this originally had like a John Williams score or Alan Silvestri score or something like that, and literally they like threw it out and added the funky like what we got, like this movie I think probably is a very different movie. Like George Miller was supposed to direct this fucking Mad Max George Miller.
But that's what I mean, right? This story to me needs to play in that kind of arena. And what it suffers is, again, it makes total sense that they pull it back and they're like, we want this to be exactly like Beverly Hills Cop.
Right.
And you're like, but this one has this extra layers that you have to explore, right? There's a dead teenager, right? We are following a child detective who sees another child dead, right? Probably someone he knows a little bit. We see him playing basketball with children. So somehow he's a children PI that also helps the community with children. So him having to deal with her simply being sold to become blood and oatmeal, that's a lot extra from the other movies to me, right? Not to mention, now you're taking a man who sees these kind of tragedies seemingly more often than he would like.
Right.
Trying to use humor as a shield, but now staring down the barrel of, not only do I have this insane, very human tragedy, right? The fact that we are not valued as lives. Now I'm standing on the edge of the abyss into there's also this actual world of mysticism, right? There's an actual hell and demons and monsters, and there's this whole other world of tragedies happening that I don't comprehend. So this is a guy who's just so charming and funny, walking the razor's edge between all of these terrifying realities. And so to bring it back and give it, the synth score and the Beverly Hills Cop vibe is not where I think this movie should have lived.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, like, the thing that I like the most about Eddie Murphy's character in this movie is, honestly, he does such a good job playing up the, like, Sam Spade, Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe kind of thing, because he's constantly the cynic. Yeah. Like, there's never a time where he fully buys into this until, like, maybe, like, at the very end when he finally can. But, like, literally almost the entire movie, he thinks this is all bullshit. Like, even, like, when they're in, like, Kathmandu and they're in Nepal and it's literally freezing out and he's, like, on the yak and they're trying to get through, like, that's the kind of shit you're like, this should be really hacky. And in any other movie, with any other, like, actor or comedian, because, like, I was reading, like, apparently Mel Gibson was supposed to be this guy. So, like...
Really? See, that makes sense to me.
Like,
That's the problem, though. The studios didn't want this great fantasy story. They wanted that police procedural. And that's hard when you put the cop on a yak.
Right.
Like,
so
that changes.
It was supposed to be Mel Gibson. He turned it down, and then they hired Eddie Murphy. So, like, what you're doing is reflavoring the movie with Eddie Murphy stuff. Like, Eddie Murphy can be serious, though. We've seen him do it. He's very good.
Yeah.
So, like... Granted, like, he's really good at doing the thing that he does, but there's a lot of, like, Beverly Hills copness in this that, for me, is out of place because, like, again, you're right. Like, the supernatural is such a huge part of this movie. It's not just police procedural. So, and that's, like, the benefit of detective stories in general is, like, they don't have to follow police procedure. That's, like, the best part of the whole thing is they're outside the law.
Yeah, well, like, imagine just the concept like, imagine the movie Seven, right? If halfway through the movie they took a detour to Florida to, like, try to find John Doe's, like, high school yearbook. Like, it's very strange. When this movie goes to Kathmandu, you're like, that feels wrong, but it offers you some really good fish out of water stuff, again, for this detective that's, really caught into this enormous thing. Like, the scene in Kathmandu, obviously the $100, right, is funny. But this is a guy who's so caught between these great tragedies, he's really focused on that $100, right? Yeah. Like, how much did he just spend to get over there and all this? But he's like, is there a little naked man running around with my $100? I'm going to beat his ass. And he spends the next, like, 3 minutes of traveling montage just doing, I'm going to whoop that guy's ass jokes. And then he gets into the temple, he's doing the, please, man.
That's
and
the
it's
best.
Just great. But this is the moment in the movie where imagine Eddie Murphy, right? He goes into that chasm. Gerald, his name's Gerald, right? He goes into that chasm. And they're like, don't spill the water. Keep walking. That scene is so funny to me. One, because it's such an interesting game to make up, right? Like, he's walking and balancing, but the addition of he can't spill a drop of water, I was like, that's a weird... Like, that screenwriter had some kind of past thing that he was, like, really channeling. Like, it's a weird game, right? If it was George Miller, it would have been don't spill a drop of breast milk, I'm sure.
Right.
Much more understandable. The apocalypse is coming. Don't waste the milk. But for Gerald and Eddie Murphy to still buy in, right? Why does he complete that mission? That's the funny part, because all we've seen is him seemingly not accepting this, but he's still going forward. And to me, what that says is he totally buys into what's happening. He has much earlier in the movie, he can't admit it to himself, right?
I think that's what it is, yeah.
Because he's fucking terrified.
I mean, that's like that's also a classic detective trope as well, is just like getting, like, you sit there constantly looking, like, I've done this with a lot of detective movies and film noir, is you look at these guys who are, like, continuously going forward, like, the fuck are you doing? Like, A, you're putting yourself in danger. B, you don't even believe in this shit. C, why would it matter? Like, it's the whole thing. Like, it's the whole point of the story is, like, to push a character beyond their bounds. So to do it here in this context is actually, I think, a lot more entertaining and a lot more interesting.
Well, yeah, and this is why it's crazy, right? It's because you're like, you can have, like, a classic noir detective is like, oh boy, I might get a suck in the old jaw if I jump into the widow's house, you know? But also I might bang the widow, so that makes sense. You know, it's a 5-mile cab ride, whatever. you have to get on a plane and go to Kathmandu.
Right.
And go
it's
into
so
this,
much more
this
important.
alternate dimension room where there's no floor and a mystical fire and he's still trying to hold on, right? So it's so much stranger than just well, I might get in trouble if I go to the black tie affair where I clearly don't fit in because I reek of gin and I've never owned a suit, But I might get a bang tail feathers with the old widow. That is a lot more understandable than he's going. The journey he takes is so much more involved.
Yeah.
That it shows you that he is really scared, right? And again, he keeps saying he's not on the case, right? But this is the ultimate case for him, right? This is the golden child, the one that he has to save all the others, right? It can make up for the Cheryls of the world. So I think he actually buys in a lot earlier than we think in the movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, he clearly buys in from the jump. Like, I think he buys in from the fight in the warehouse with the heavy metal band. Like, that to me is that's the jumping off point, specifically because, like, he finds out what happens to Cheryl. Like, that, and he realizes he doesn't want it to happen. And he doesn't want this to happen to anybody again. Like, that I think is, like, the best, like, call to adventure in a lot of movies we've seen. Like, all the other detective stories we've watched, like, the call to adventure has been very muddy. Like, even in Brick, which is so clearly a by-the-numbers detective story, pretty unnecessary, like, when you think about it. Because really, the story of what happened to Emily ends within 15 minutes of the movie. This is, like...
I mean, you could argue it's over in the very first scene. Right? Like, we know what happened.
Right. I know what happened. I'm good. This, though, is like the first time in these movies, like, we've watched this month that he's at, like, there's been an actual call to adventure.
Yeah.
Like, the story that he technically was on ends.
Yeah.
So what's next?
I
So
think
really,
I know when it happens, though, right? Like, see if this clicks in your brain. So he goes to the crime scene, right? And he sees a dead child. That's horrific enough. But now there's this extra stuff, right? These runes on the wall and whatever. He's like, what the fuck? The blood in the oatmeal. There's something extra repulsive about it.
Right.
And I think in a way, the extra evidence and repulsiveness of it gives him a shield against the truly most horrific thing is not bloody oatmeal and blood on the wall. It's that there's a dead teenager out there, right? That's the most disgusting thing. So I think those become a little bit of a shield for him to try to keep it together, right? As he's moving forward with this, fuck, I failed. There's a dead kid, He might know their parents, right? Surely he's questioned the mother, the parents. He's going to have to tell them what happened.
Right.
Or maybe she had no one and he was the last straw, right? So now he's facing the emptiness of that. He goes to the diner and meets up with the lady who already interrupted the basketball game with, you're the chosen one. There's a golden child. Magic, come with me. And he's like, what? He can't accept it. The moment I think he buys in, right, is he's still like, this is fucking ridiculous. I'm wasting time talking to you. You were at the crime scene. Maybe he thinks she's a part of it, right? Because she showed up at the crime scene, strangely enough. When he asked her about the bloody oatmeal, and she says, I don't know. I think that's when he allows himself to buy in. Because now she's not some merchant of, some kind of bullshit prophecy. I have all the answers, follow me. She's another person who is struggling to deal with the enormity of tragedy in this world, trying to do her best. And I think in that moment, he's allowed to bond with her.
Okay, I can buy that.
Because she says she doesn't have all the answers.
But again, that's a really good call to adventure. Like, not having the answers and in search of the answers is what we're looking for. I'm with you on that. That works, yeah.
Instead of being like the sage mentor who's like, come with me, eat this root, do this, I know everything. She also is just a person who needs help, man. They both want to save a kid and don't know how to do it without the other. So I think that's the cool bonding moment for their. I think that's when he buys in, because right after that they take him to see the dragon snake lady.
Right.
And I think at that point, because that's where you could say maybe he buys in there, or he's like these fucking criminals. I think it's her admitting she's not like the know-it-all. But yeah, that moment he's still kind of playing. He's still cracking wise. I love it. He's like, hey, what's your schedule look like? Because that silhouette is rocking. Because to be fair, who among us wouldn't see a woman who is like half dragon and also be like, I think I have to know. I think, do you at least have like a fans only account? Like, I have to know.
That's a good point. I'll be honest with you. I think I'd have to know.
You have to know. I had a friend once who used to be like, if there were aliens that came down, would you fuck one? And I was like, wow, okay, we're just skipping like so much like global geopolitics, right? There and science and biology. There's so many steps we're skipping from. We find out there's life in the universe besides us to would you put your dick in it, right? This enormous chasm of questions we won't answer. Let's get to the important part. And the answer is yes. If you were the first one who could have sex with an alien species, of course you would do that.
Right. Much like
it's the great unknown, right? The same.
Much like Gerald, we have to step into the great unknown. That's the whole point. Exactly. Oh my God!
Right? You can't fight the darkness if you're standing on the top of the well. You gotta dive in, man.
You gotta dive in, man. That's part of the deal.
Yeah. So I thought that was great, man. Now the scene I really want to discuss with you. This is where I think this movie is next level great to me, and this is where I think you can see the roots of what this movie was supposed to be. This movie has. So I'm talking, of course, about the dream sequence, right?
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Where Tywin Lannister somehow and his cronies invade a dream world. I believe it's Eddie Murphy's dream, right? Because there is a question of where he's teleported to. I think it's Eddie Murphy's headspace, right? So if you break down, I watched this scene like 3 or 4 times, like, man, this is like some fucking low-rent David Lynch bullshit. Because eventually you see the white steed, right? And I was like, all right, that's just classic dream shit, right? To let us know it's a dream.
Right.
And then him and Tywin start doing their, hey, we're doing this. The part that fucking trips me up, though. So he's doing the devil may care, joking about, right? Every time he cracks wise, there's an audience of old white people clapping and laughing, and an applause sign goes on.
Right.
This, to me, is Eddie Murphy screaming to us to please understand the psychosis he must face every single day. That scene was bone-chilling to me.
I mean, in that respect, yes. Otherwise, it's just kind of weird.
But imagine every Eddie Murphy movie and character, right? Walking around, right? Chucking it up, fighting the powers that be, right? He's kind of always got that cool, like, he's the outsider and he's fighting his way, against people that don't want him there, right? Like, famous, like, country club scene and this and that. There are all these moments, right? See, my dog agrees. He's furious. He's having his own dream. But there are all these moments like that. Now imagine in every one of those Eddie Murphy movies, right? Take Beverly Hills Cops. Every time he cracks wise, there's an audience of old white people clapping and cheering him on in his head.
Right.
Terrifying.
Yes.
This is a man who's so psychologically broken that he has invented his own studio audience, and of course is all old Midwestern white people, it looks like, to cheer him on as he spits in the face of those being in his way.
Okay.
Walk me through it. Walk me through it, Alex. Break this down with me.
Well, I'm thinking through this. I didn't really overly analyze that scene, short of it being a dream sequence, because it does have a David Lynchian thing to it.
But that's the thing. Dreams always have a hidden meaning. This is a shocking admission by Eddie Murphy. I think he probably wrote this scene himself, and he's like, put this in. These people need to know what I suffer.
I think that as a meta dream, yes, you could probably make the case. I would say that would make sense if I thought, I believe this is the last time Eddie Murphy worked on a movie where he did not write anything.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking of it in this context, yes. Metaphorically, this works as Eddie Murphy sort of playing to the Eddie Murphy-ness of it all and saying, like, I am famous. I hate being famous. I just want to be taken seriously. And this is the kind of shit that happens sometimes.
Right.
Like,
but even the Eddie Murphy-ness of it is shocking, right? Take it back down to Gerald.
If you take it back down to Gerald, the thing
is extra scary to me if you take it back down to Gerald.
If you take it back down to Gerald, to me, what it ends up being is much more about it's much more about the containment he has to do as his profession. Like, you think about
yes, exactly.
Like, if you're not a police officer, like if you're not bound by the structure of law, but particularly if your like main focus as a PI or a detective is finding lost children, I feel like for me personally, I'd be a fucking monster and I'd have like no scruples. Like if I was like constantly
looking for... First time you see a dead child and you're like, I could have maybe helped and you didn't, that's it. You're done. You're broken forever.
That's the line. That's like the Batman line we always talk about. Like that's the line that gets crossed. I'm like, I'm done. All right, everyone's dead. I don't give a shit. Like That's sort of like,
right.
That's what it is. So maybe this is the construct he has to put in his mind. This is what everyone expects of him. So when Sardo and the other dudes show up in his dream, they're invading this construct and saying like, what do you got? And that's when he's like, cool, we're done. Like I'm stepping over this line and I'm going to take care of business.
See,
that
I don't accept that though. I think his mind is always like this. And it's a twofold thing that I think is so crazy, and why I love this scene is, one, his constant joking mechanism, right?
Right.
Now you see kind of the subconscious roots of it, right? It's a defense mechanism for him, and his subconscious has created it to where it's a, like a Pavlovian reward system, where every time he tells a joke, his brain's like, "Yay, good quip." Good when he's having that big fight with his brother. My brother shall, reprimand me at the airport. You're like, oh, that's just hilarious Eddie Murphy stuff, right? This charming guy who's so quick on his feet. Or is it this fucking broken man? And inside his brain, they're like, you got him that time. Good for you. And that's his subliminal defense. It's now become this Pavlovian trauma. But the other part, why is that the audience? Why is the audience really old white people that look like they're vacationing?
Yeah, that's the thing that's super curious to me. Like the audience has to be.
That's who he thinks he's supposed to be.
Oh wow!
Are you making palatable for that?
Are you making the Darth Vader chasing Amy case right now?
Refresh me. What the fuck is that, and why do I not know what that is?
Are you saying that deep down Eddie Murphy wants to be a white man?
No, I think deep down, I think this goes back to the Mel show at the start of the movie, where Mel is not hearing him, right?
Okay.
And not letting people hear him. I think there's a version of Eddie Murphy subconsciously, or Gerald subconsciously crafting himself into the person that the general population, right? America in the 80s, right? Old, overweight, Midwestern white people would not only listen to, but applaud, right? I think that's why that's his audience, right?
Okay.
Do you imagine that Gerald in his time off, right? We see him playing basketball with a bunch of kids, right? That's the only free time activity we see is that he's hanging out with kids, maybe he's a counselor helping him out, something like that. Do you think the audience in his mind is who he spends his time with? Are those his peers and compatriots? I don't think so.
No.
So why is that the audience that he is craving?
I think it's because
the response from.
I think he's a loner for one, because he's a detective. He's a loner.
Everyone
for sure.
who deals with serious shit, like you can't do the job that Gerald does in this movie and then talk to some guy who works at State Farm talking about how they don't get the right coffee anymore.
Yeah,
your job stakes don't match up. You can't have that talk.
Right. I think in that regard, the audience is much closer to being. I wouldn't say necessarily Gerald's like. I think it's less about like Gerald, what Gerald wants to be, like who he wants to be, so to speak, and more about.
But look at the feeding system, right? So Gerald cracks a joke, right, in a tense situation. His brain filters that down into he has told the joke, and now this audience of not his peers, right, these old white vacationers are applauding him. The sign even comes on, right? So Gerald is not only the star of his own movie, he's the director of the dream who's saying, audience applaud, forcing them to applaud him.
Right. That's...
See?
Yeah, okay.
That's begging for approval from that audience to me.
Right. I mean, I think that he's...
Scary
I think
trauma.
in general...
It's psychosis.
I think he's absolutely seeking approval from just... I think he's seeking approval from... I think he's seeking approval from deep inside himself for... Cheryl's a great example. He missed that.
Right.
He did not save that girl.
But the audience is not a bunch of Geralds forgiving him.
Right.
And applauding him on.
That's what it is deep down he's trying to forgive himself. And that's okay, here's what it is.
Because that's Mel's audience out there.
Right. He's trying to forgive himself.
Yes.
The reason it's canned laughter and canned applause is because it's false. He cannot accept it, so that's why he did. That's the true call to adventure.
Oh, nice. Okay, I'm with you now. I like this.
He is trying to forgive himself. This canned false applause is not going to give it to him. So that's why he truly takes the case. That's why he goes out and that's why he submits to this weird supernatural world, because he knows deep down this is how he rectifies his past mistakes.
Fascinating.
But
that's what I mean. That is a really interesting way to show us on screen the trauma that someone like him suffers.
Totally. Yeah.
And those
absolutely.
the weird elements of this movie, those extra kind of long out on the branch moments.
Yeah.
That's what makes this movie more interesting to me than his other detective stuff, right? And again, I don't think this movie's as streamlined and as good as the other two, right? I think the other two are much firmer, well-oiled machines, right?
Sure.
But I think what Eddie Murphy does so spectacularly, right? His enormous charisma and comedy, but also those moments where you can see he's a man about to break. I think that really works better in this setting. I think Eddie Murphy in that moment with the audience, I think that's the kind of really strange psychological moment that I like. Of course, at the end when they start breaking into demons and the kid can create his own little meal, but he only eats leaves, which is like, hey man, make a better food. I don't know. Right? Like, I like all the mysticism stuff. That is just geared right at me. That's how I like to watch my stories, right?
Right.
The more mysticism and demons and whatever, the better.
Sure.
But I do think that this movie, and again, I'm sure there are better versions of this movie out there that could have existed. And whatever, we didn't get those. I think the movie we got is still a splendid example of adding on some genre tropes,
right,
to kind of deepen this story to me. I don't know. I like the weirder elements, and I think it makes Eddie Murphy's performance something that you can get a lot more out of.
Well, I think the weirder elements deepen and sort of enrich the experience of what we would normally like. Think about this: if there was no supernatural elements to it at all, it'd just be like him traveling the world. Then essentially, it's like a more boring version of Indiana Jones, but like with Beverly Hills Cop. Like it doesn't quite work. Like the mysticism and the supernatural elements make this its own movie. And not only that, like with an actor like Eddie Murphy facing them, who like by nature, we assume comedians are cynical. Like, I mean, that's, you work in comedy, like it's assumed that the people like comedians are cynical. That's how they come up with a lot of great bits. So like, to me, when you approach the supernatural with that level of understanding and that level of, thought process, what you're doing is not only are you getting a great like automatic straight man for a scene, but you're also creating this whole other world within the genre you're trying to, like, it is a detective story, but the supernatural elements just make the detective story that much more interesting rather than like stray us off the path of what the story actually is.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, this could just be me. I couldn't tell you what the actual case was he was trying to solve in 48 Hours or Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
No. Like,
I remember Axel Foley is hilarious, and I remember him and Nick Nolte were a great duo in 48 Hours, but, like, I don't know what the fuck they were solving. Like, I don't know what the case was. Right? Like, no. I think that's the problem with a lot of police procedurals and this and that. Like, Die Hard, I remember exactly what he was doing, right? Terrorist in a building, he's got to stop him. It felt weird and different to me.
Right.
What are other great action franchises? I don't know the stories of half of these, right?
I mean, I could tell you, I know what, I mean, Beverly Hills Cop, he's literally just trying to find out who killed his friend. Cool.
Is that all it is?
Like, yeah, that's pretty much
all right, well, that's fine. That's fine. But that's what I mean. It's like when you say Golden Child, I remember exactly what the fuck he's doing. I remember the case because it's like, we got to save little cave-dwelling Jesus, right? So he can save all the children.
Right.
And also we learned there was a slew of other dead golden children and other knives. There's like a whole set.
Yeah.
That's why we live in the mean world of today, is because he's compassion, but the golden child before him was justice that got murdered.
Yeah, this
which
was like
also weighs heavy on the Cheryl note of the story.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Deepness. Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, this movie just has, if you watch it for what it is, it's very entertaining, but this movie has a lot of great layers to it that I don't think get explored enough.
Sure. Well, this is the thing. I actually watched it yesterday getting prepared, right? Because We don't have daycare access anymore because of what's happening. And my wife is a healthcare professional, so she's still working. I'm just staying at home with the kids. And I was like, I got to get this watched so we can talk about it. And I watched it with my kids, right? My 5-year-old and my 2-year-old. And they loved it just because it's this kind of fantastic adventure, right? My kid is almost probably the exact same age I was when I watched it. And he loved it like that. This is the first time I had watched it in many, many years. And I found this whole other kind of despair subplot that really meant a lot to me. Right? I really was touched by what was happening and the struggles that this guy would face. Because once you're an adult for a while, you're like, man, doesn't it all feel like helpless nonsense and violence on one side and then this deep abyss of things I don't understand on the other? Like, isn't that exactly what being an adult is? So I don't know. I found a lot more kind of heartstring moments in it this time, if you will.
I would agree with that. I mean, again, I only saw it once when I was a kid, but I definitely didn't remember it being that interesting, and this was really a fun watch.
I think it's a really good movie, and I think it's a dark path to go down with movies where you start talking about different cuts and like what could have been and this and that. Like the movie we got might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's a wildly entertaining and interesting film.
It's wonderful.
And I think it's a fantastic case, right? We're not just tracking down dirty cops or random bad guys, whatever those other movies do. This is important. This one mattered, right? Because every drop of water that gets lost in this movie is a dead kid. And that matters. And also Tywin Lannister turning into a huge demon. That was just fun.
That was pretty sweet. Great creature work, by the way.
I will say there is one wildly unanswered question, right? As I was waiting for the Golden Child to do the sometimes dead is better, right? Because I was like, so that girl's just been dead for like
no,
at least
that is not this movie.
Yeah, but I was like, so she's just going to wake up with an arrow hole in her back and they're just going to get straight to the sex in their friend's mansion? Like, I was like, there's some things we should discuss. Like, sometimes dead's better. You know what I mean? Like, I wanted that scene. The Golden Child might have been setting him up for a lesson. We don't know. You
Golden
can't
Child.
Everyone knows. This is alchemy, right? This is our show. You don't get something for nothing.
Right.
There's something dead inside of her still. Believe that. Believe that.
Golden
Take
Child
that to
too.
the bank. Yeah.
Cemeteried.
I don't care how golden this kid is. I'm not having sex with whoever's brought back. Not happening. Right? Okay, that's it, guys, for the Golden Child. That's it for the Pod Takes the Case. I know there are enormous amounts of other awesome Detective Private Eye movies, and we will someday revisit this theme. I'm sure of it. Guys, that's it for now. Remember, we have 2 themes coming to you next month. The Pod is held captive, and the Pod is a madman, right? So we're going to be doing a lot of movies next month. Probably 10, I think we have on the list. 8 to 10, plus some double features. Plus, if we find some cool stuff on demand,
you never know.
Is now the trend. We might talk about that, too. If there's stuff you guys want to see us talk about or hear us talk about, please reach out and let us know, man. We would love to do that for you.
We're all home. Might as well.
Yeah, spread a little happiness in this this day and age. That's it, guys. Please leave us a rating and review. Please find us on social media. Follow our YouTube channel, Nerd Alchemist, plural with an S at the end. For the Film Alchemist, I'm Josh Griffey.
I am Alex D'Antino.
Stay golden, Pony Child.